Ready, Zach? Okay. Hi, everybody. Just a little quick housekeeping announcement before we start. If you could please silence your cell phones so they don't beep or bark or go off in the middle of the event. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much. Good evening. Welcome to Book Passage. My name is Allison Bainbridge, and I want to thank you for being here to celebrate environmentalist, entrepreneur, and best-selling author Paul Hawken's latest book, Carbon, the Book of Life. Peter Coyote, who's distinguished actor, writer, and Buddhist priest, is here to discuss this incredibly relevant and fascinating journey into the world of carbon. In this stirring, hopeful, and deeply humane book, Carbon, the Book of Life, Paul illuminates the subtle connections between carbon and our collective human. He stated in an interview recently, "We objectify the living world and see ourselves as distinct and separate from a world that we can exploit, extract from, and use to our own ends. We don't have a climate crisis. We are the crisis. And honoring life is the best thing we can do against climate change." We are in dire times for many reasons, and we need community gatherings, discussions about what's at stake. And so for me, an event like this is so powerful, and it makes me sometimes get a little emotional that we're able to provide a place for people to come and hear extraordinary people like our two authors today. The book at the center of the discussion tonight is a journey into the world of carbon, which is the most versatile element on the planet. We are deeply grateful to Paul and Peter, to extremely supportive friends and allies of Book Passage, and two of our country's most outstanding advocates in the climate change crisis. We look forward to the discussion and thank them so much for sharing their wisdom, points of view, and experience in exploring what matters. Please give a warm welcome to Paul Hawken and Peter Coyote.
Thank you. Can you hear in the back? Is this not on?
It's on. Just have to hold
Is it?
Yes.
Is there a sound man that's doing it? Okay.
Yeah, here.
Well, thank you, Allison, for giving away the bullseye of my carefully calibrated target here. I'm really honored to be here tonight. Paul and I have been friends probably for 50 years. We've had many conversations on many subjects, and I think I've read all his books, and to me, if you get the book, you'll see I gave myself away on the blurb that I wrote for it. I think it's one of the most important books I've read, certainly in the last 10 years. And so what I really want to do tonight is give those of you that aren't already familiar a really good taste of Paul's mind, the way he talks, the way he thinks. And I've plotted sort of a course that will lead us to what I think are the most radical and profound conclusions of his book. So I'm going to be like a jazz pianist. I'm going to comp some chords, read some quotes from Paul's book, and he's going to sing.
We're listening.
So we'll start with a short one. For hundreds of thousands of years, there was an ongoing process of plant selection by Homo sapiens, which were food, which were medicine, and which were toxic. North American medicinal plants were long known to Native Americans, from bare root and echinacea to golden seal and American ginseng. Colonists did not respect the breadth of their botanical intelligence. Where I live in Northern California, the local Miwok ate serviceberries, barberries, strawberries, toyon berries, cream bush berries, plums, cherries, gooseberries, rose hips, blue elderberries, snowberries, huckleberries, and grapes. For nuts, they chose hazelnuts, walnuts, and pine nuts. Roots included onions, ginger, cluster lilies, native tulips, camas, fritillaries, desert parsley, evening primrose, and cattails. Vegetable greens were monkey flowers, sage, clovers, violets, mule's ears, redbud, and cottonwood flowers. Wild peas and grasses were harvested for their seeds. Tea was lilacs, self-heal, and fir, sweetened with maple syrup from big leaf maples. From the rivers they caught salmon, trout, and lampreys. No obesity, no asthma, no heart disease, no dementia, no Alzheimer's, no psoriasis, no type 1 or type 2 diabetes. None of us can eat that way anymore, but we can make choices.
Yeah. The Miwok we live, and I want to acknowledge the traditional landholders that were up. You can't hear me. I can. Yeah, I don't speak very loud, so just raise your hand in the back when I mumble off. But just in land acknowledgement to the Miwok, we live on their land, and we've taken their land, and we haven't even begun to make reparations or ask for forgiveness or to restore their sovereignty over lands that they have cared for we don't know how long, actually. Come to think of it. And that description of their diet, their foods that they ate, is emblematic of how well they knew where they lived. And I would say one of the purposes of Carbon, the Book of Life, is to point out to people that we don't know where we live at all. We think geographically or by names or even, by the names of waterways or creeks or certain number of botanical plants or species that are here, but in a deeper sense, we do not know where we live, and that's not a criticism, by the way, not at all. But what we do know is there's more life underneath the ground than there is above the ground, literally, in any way you want to measure it. And we're clueless as to what's going on down there. And I'm not saying that Miwok did, but they certainly respected it. They respected it because it was Madre, it was Mother, and there's 5,000 estimated some odd cultures on the planet, and not one of them said Father Earth. They all said Mother Earth because they all knew life came from the firmament, from the soil, from the earth, and no place else. And so that is something we have forgotten and abused and run over and paved and chemicalized and destroyed. And so the book Carbon, the Book of Life, is really to try to shift the I would say the climate narrative, which to me is really dysfunctional, and to shift it away from objectification of carbon. That is to say, it's a thing, it's an element. We have to fight, tackle, and combat it. All these sort of, we have to fix it. These, with all due respect to my gender, male verbs, right? To do something about something that doesn't exist in its singularity. Carbon is always a flow, an incredible flow that has memory and can store energy, and no other element can do that. And that's why it informs life and the flow of life in all ways. So my hope is that we can shift it, because the narrative that exists right now is objectifying it, right? And objectification is always separation. You can't objectify unless you say, I'm not a part of that. I'm going to name it. It has a name. This is what it does. This is what, it's not a me. It's something else. And we have 1.2 trillion carbon atoms in every cell in our body. And we're talking about basically fighting and climate change and fighting carbon and, carbon neutral, decarbonization, all these jargonistic terms that actually turn people off because they don't understand them. And if they did, they would know they're not true. You can't decarbonize. There's no such thing as carbon neutral, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that list of plants that the Miwok ate just gives a sense of what it means to know where you live. And if you didn't move around and had to stay in one place, you would find out pretty quickly where you live, what sustains you, and then how to sustain that life for your children and their children's children's children. And so when the early, I don't know what to call them, colonists, settlers, Europeans anyway, came to San Joaquin Valley, and they thought it looked like Hyde Park. It was just beautiful turf, and the oak trees were well spaced, and there was huge beds of lilies surrounding the oak trees. And they described it as wild in their writings back to Europe. They said, the wilderness here is so beautiful. Of course, it was not a wilderness. It was a garden. And what the Miwok did is harvest the lilies. It was a staple food. They loved it. And we would too if we ate it. And they would, if you have a lily bulb, it's 3 corms. So you eat 1, plant 2. It's like common sense. You're always creating more life in abundance for those who follow you. And so the Miwok have a lot to teach us.
So let that be the spine of the evening's conversation. Now we're going to hang some ribs on it. So let's take that perception and let me read something about trees. Scientists promote the idea of plants and trees being weaponized to combat climate change. Farm-grown biofuel will replace refined kerosene to power aircraft. Genetically modified soy will be bioplastic feedstock, and cultured meat will be grown in towering stainless steel tanks. In the United States, 107 processing facilities dry and process wood into 11 million tons of pellets per year for renewable energy. The astonishing proposition that burning trees addresses climate change favorably. According to author and plant raconteur Richard Mabey, plants have largely been reduced to the status of useful and decorative objects. They've come to be seen as the furniture on the planet, useful, attractive, but just there. They are certainly not regarded as beings in the sense that animals are.
There's a wonderful writer named Zoe Slanger. Her book is here. It's called The Light Eaters. She spent 8 years talking to botanists and listening and asking questions. She's a great climate journalist, and she decided it was too much, so she went to plants. It's like, and it's a really great read, but at the end of the book, she talks about something that infects all of science, and that is the Kunzian dilemma of paradigms, which is that the scientists who are in charge of peer review tend to be the older, established scientists, and if the new bucks and the new scientists come out and say, I have this wonderful, amazing discovery, they know they won't get peer reviewed, and there goes their status at that university. And so a lot of what's being discovered and seen actually is not peer reviewed for that reason, because the scientists know it won't be. She was talking to some of these, and some of them are older scientists, I don't mean just youth, but scientists that she had really respect, and they were describing plants. And they were saying the only way we can understand a plant, any plant, is to describe it as a brain. And it doesn't have a CPU. It doesn't have neurons. It doesn't have. But the function of the plant can only be understood if it's a brain, in terms of its intelligence, its perception, its capacity and ability to communicate and to metabolize, to communicate with the mycelia underneath, of course. And when I started to say we don't know where we live, which is like, I do. No, I don't think we do. And one example was, there's in the book about a ryegrass, a rye seed, just like it's about as big as a kernel of wheat, about the same. Used a lot, rye's used a lot for grass. And a scientist decided to count the number of roots on a ryegrass, one seed of rye, and came up with 14 million roots. 14 million roots, okay? Now that's an electron microscope process, obviously not by hand. And 4 million were hair roots, and so putting them aside, there's 10 million roots, but they're connected, through hyphae to mycelia. Whoa, wait a minute. 10 million roots connected to mycelia. And what are they doing? They're offering sugar, that is carbohydrates, right, to the mycelia. Mycelia say, basically, thank you, what do you need? Or the plant saying, this is what I need. It can usually be nitrogen or phosphorus, but also it can be selenium, it can be zinc, it can be potassium. It's what the plant needs. It's telling the mycelia what it needs. And then they're transacting. Well, I don't know what they're measuring, sugar versus nitrogen, what the scales are, but that's what's happening. That's communication. So there's 10 million communications going on between the mycelia and the plant. And those transactions are recorded by Adam Adamski at the Royal Society in London, who's been recording them for years. The mycelia make a clicking noise, like the San people in Botswana or sperm whales. And they're recorded. And he discovered they communicate in packets of clicks. On the packet of clicks actually arrange themselves into patterns, and he calls them sentences, which has got him into a lot of trouble with mycologists, okay? Because he said these sentences are more complex in Indo-European languages. Now, I'm not saying you should believe that or not believe that. That's not my role. I'm just saying is, what the heck is going on down there? Just maybe his interpretation is incorrect. But what is correct is, and you can listen to them, they're online. And you can also see Toby Keir's work with fungi and plants. And you can see these, 3-4 cell thick mycelia. I mean, there's nutrients going both directions in the same tube of mycelia. Like, well, who's sending the message, and how do they know, and where's it going, and what is it, and so forth. That's intelligence, that is right there underneath the soil, any place where the soil has not been destroyed. What's that?
I said it's consciousness.
Oh, okay, thank you. It's consciousness. Exactly. I mean, it's not just consciousness. The whole world is conscious. I mean, everything that's alive is conscious. And so our understanding of plants, I think, is burgeoning right now. It's been sort of stuck in some way, some post-Luther Burbank way, and just caught there and stuck there. And, of course, tribal cultures around the world have always said they listen to the plants, or, yeah, right, and so much for, European science listening to other people that didn't, ignored it, brushed it away, and they were. How? We don't know. Consciousness is the only way we know how. And so, as I said, to repeat, like this, that's carbon, that's the flow of carbon, and that's what I'm talking about, which is just astonishing. And we're just beginning to understand that due to the work of really a new generation of scientists listening to people who understand traditional ecological knowledge, and that melding together two points, empirical science and observational science, and listening to each other and respecting it and seeing how they can work together towards mutual understanding.
So one of the things I learned from the book was how long ago Charles Darwin got an inkling of this and translated this into the scientific community, where it just sort of laid fallow for so long. So my next little quote from the book was called Plants. Charles Darwin focused on plants, soil, and worms for the second half of his life. Darwin and his son Francis began a series of experiments in the 1850s involving plant movement. Plants slowly sway, swivel, stretch, and move with obvious purpose, visible to a patient observer. Rather than plant movement being random, The observant Darwin saw it as purposeful, meaning there must be a cause and effect. Darwin proposed that a control center resided in the sensory root tips, like the brain of a lower animal. And Paul just said, beneath the soil is a world that's more complex than what's above. Plausibly, the giant dipterocarp trees of Borneo might have several 100 million roots, possibly 1 billion. Invisible threads in the soil form a plant's sensory organ for which we have no precise word. Root tips discern hard and soft obstacles, detect and avoid pollution, and connect to the hi-fi of mycelia networks, where they conduct. Next word is astonishing, but I have to get to it. An astonishing number of transactions, bartering their carbon in exchange for minerals and nutrients. Plant neurobiologist Stephen Mancuso believes that descriptions of how the brain works are just as valid for a plant. Quote, "The neuron is not a miracle cell. It's a normal cell that can produce an electrical signal. In the case of plants, almost every cell can do that. A decision-making process occurs constantly within the root tips. But how do they communicate?"
Wow, I want to read that book.
That's why I'm quoting it.
Well, the interesting thing is, Darwin was shamed and criticized for when he described evolution. And then when he retired to his manor and worked with his son on plants, he was castigated again. He was really hammered by scientists, and he was right again. What an observant human being. And the writings that are more obscure, really, they're available, of course, really do describe a sense. I mean, he wasn't always right. He made some really big mistakes too. And his big mistake was really when he came across the Magellan Straits, and he saw basically the Selknam people. And it's called Tierra del Fuego because they carried coals around and started fires to keep warm. So that's why it's called the Land of Fire, because of the Selknam. Also it's called Yamana. And people, and they were just slathered in seal oil and had a little thing there to carry the coals, and some were naked, but they were virtually naked. And for him, at that point, evolution was evolving in his mind, and he thought, this proves evolution because they're between an animal and a human. This is the transitional stage. So he was really off his rocker there, because there was a man of the cloth, let's say, and who had nothing to do in the last 120 some odd Yamana people had not been killed or died of smallpox and other European diseases. And he had to take care of them. He had nothing to do, but he was basically interested in language. And so he started to make a dictionary with the tribal chief then, who was just passed down, but the chief had long ago been killed. And and the chief said, "I'll explain our language to you, but I can't talk about cosmology or women's issues, the things that they're verboten. I will not speak to you of these." And he said, "Okay." So anyway, they got to 30,000 words, and he died. The lexicologist died. And that dictionary is available. You can get it. It's printed once, and it's in use. You can buy it used and so forth, and read it. Do read it. I have one, and it is basically metaphor. And there's Aristotle who said genius is metaphor. And actually, when you read it, and just page after page after page, it actually tells you how to live there. In other words, as you learn the language, it's the teaching of place. And so depression is a crab molting its shell, but it hasn't come off yet. So the language is exquisite. And these are the people they kidnapped, 4 of them, and took them to England for Queen Adelaide, I believe, to show these in-between creatures and so forth. These poor people all dressed up, and they, I think 2 of them got back, and 2 died. Yeah.
So we're not here to pitch another religion, but Paul did study with Tibetan Buddhists, and I've studied for a long time with Japanese Buddhists. And the great insight of the Buddha was called dependent origination. Mm-hmm. And what it meant was that nothing exists alone. So you and I have a sense that I'm here and you're over there. But everyone in this room have umbilical cords that are connected to oxygen, to sunlight, to water, to the mycelial roots, to pollinating insects. So on the one hand, it's true that this sack of skin is different than your sack of skin, but the thing that we call a self has no independent existence outside of all of it. And so in this next quote that I'm read, we're starting to point at this problem, which to me is the core problem as to whether we remain selfish or whether we honor all these umbilical cords that attach us like relatives to all these different things. So how did the 438,000 different plants learn to be that plant? Look at a meadow or abandoned plot of land. Are the assembled species of vegetation unaware of one another? Unlikely. How do plants interact, link, and learn? The possibility that plants communicate utilizing sound is controversial. Even interspecies communication between animals and insects is discounted, though bears are acutely sensitive to the meaning of grasshopper crepitations and the ascending-descending cry of a red-tailed hawk. But plants, they don't have a nervous system, a brain, synapses. Although anthropologists and ethnographers have studied indigenous people who creditably interact with and speak to plants, there's never been any scientific follow-through. The reason is simple. We use ourselves as a reference point for what is possible or not, leading to disbelief and skepticism.
It's interesting to hear it read back. I never have. When you write, you see your work, because I go over and over and over and over and over, perfectionist, but you see it so often you actually somehow lose it. You don't have the distance, which I just had listening to it and going.
Full disclosure, I just did the audiobook.
Full disclosure, I asked him to. But I don't know what to say to that quote. We've sort of touched on it already.
I'll give you a boost. I'll give you a boost with this next little sentence.
Give me a boost.
Our relationship to the biosphere will determine what lies ahead for humanity. Bending the arc away from blatant degeneration toward ecological recovery depends upon knowledge and respect for the world of plants. Maybe awe is the proper term. They represent the greatest and most exquisite flow of carbon on Earth, the starting point for our breath and life. We might ask, what is more important to the planet, plants or people? If the plants leave, we follow within days.
Yeah, and if we leave, plants are cool.
So, thank you. Uncle Dribble will continue. So, one of the things that Paul's book woke me up to is that there is an imminent hustle on the horizon that's coming at all of us. You might have heard it mentioned, but it's coming. And it's the carbon capture hustle. So there are machines that Paul can tell you about. They cost $1 billion to make. They cost $300 million a year to run. And for all that money, they capture 19 minutes of carbon out of the atmosphere. And so they want to build thousands of them. This will be the industrial excavation, separate approach to solving this problem. And I think you've given us fair warning, and you could talk about where the real alternatives are.
Yeah, I mean, this is tech applied to climate, and I don't doubt the sincerity of the people who are pursuing this.
You're a nicer person than I am.
Well, I think if they didn't make any money with it, their sincerity might ebb a little bit, but I do feel that they actually think it's going to work and we need it. The IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says if we don't do it, we don't have a chance. And I'm saying if we keep having the IPCC tell us what we can and can or should do, we don't have a chance, because this is consensus science and there's no such thing. If science is not consensual, that's called belief, and science is not a belief system. And so the direct air capture industry is growing in leaps and bounds, and it does exactly that, which is it sucks the atmosphere and captures 4 parts per 10,000 of CO2 and then separates the C from the O2. And the O2 goes someplace else. The C, the carbon, is then liquefied. Then it's pumped in a liquid form in pipelines to geological formations where it's supposed to stay for tens of thousands or millions of years. Okay, that's direct air capture. Now the problem with it, besides the numbers, let's put aside the financial boondoggle that it is, and let's talk about the second law of thermodynamics, which is, I mean, you could say lots of laws, people say laws and so forth, or maybe somebody could question, you can't question the second law, or we wouldn't be here, the universe wouldn't exist and so forth, and energy goes in one direction and no other, can't go backwards, and an ice cube in your glass and there's no ice cubes in mine, but here, it's not going to get colder and colder while we're in this room. Energy goes in one direction. Okay, it's called entropy. We all know what entropy is. You have a fire, what do you have left? That's ashes. That's entropy. It's combusted. The C in the wood is combined, with the O and made CO2, and you have ash. Okay, so the CO2 in the atmosphere is entropy from combusting coal, gas, and oil, and wood is for that matter. And there's also a normal cyclical process of CO2 being emitted by soil and plants and being recaptured. But the CO2 in question that wants to be captured is the result of combustion. Okay, so that's entropy. Now, what is direct air capture? What are these machines? What do they do? Well, they're extremely energy intensive. And so the direct air capture industry is saying, don't worry. We'll use wind turbines, and we'll use hydro if it's available, and we'll use solar panels and so forth, Well, the idea that somehow energy is free and so forth, it's not. I mean, so entropy is caused by the manufacturing, the maintenance of solar panels and wind turbines. And so what they're saying is, don't look now, but we're going to use entropy to cure entropy. That's exactly what they're saying. And it's not something it's questionable, like I have a different opinion. Physics doesn't have opinions. The second law is the second law. And it'd be just the same as if I went out to a pasture where somebody is grazing cows and said, gosh, you have a lot of cow patties here. I said, yeah, uh-huh. I think I'm going to make cows out of those cow patties. And you'd be seen as a madman. Madmen are running direct air capture. No question. And So it's not just that. There's some other technologies, BECS, if you've heard of BECS, I'm sure, bioenergy carbon capture systems. That's the one that's most spectacular in terms of breadth and depth. Not actually. DAC, we'd need 10 or 20 million machines that are running 24/7 up through the year 2100 to stabilize. So in the case of BECS, we need a area of land the size of India, okay, that we would plant with switchgrass or trees or different types of, woody material. And we would plant it, we would harvest it, we would burn it, we would capture the carbon when it burnt, and that would be renewable energy. Seriously. And no country has volunteered to be that. India, by the way. The Global South raised their hand and said, where do you think you're going to plant all these trees and burn them? Because not our country. No country has basically said, yeah, bring it on. We need it. None. And yet, that is in the IPCC as well. This is what we have to do. And so I think this is really what I'm talking about is we have a climate movement, quote, quote, that is just way off track because it is the objectification of nature, and that's exactly the thinking that's causing the problem. In other words, the thinking that caused the crisis is the crisis. And so that's what passages that Peter's reading and others, and I think there's many other people talking about this, not just me, but it's like, whoa, can we just step back and look at our connections to each other, for example? There's 40 trillion microbes circling around me on my eyelashes inside, and if they die, I die like that. So we are a community. We are not just the human body. We depend on that community. All life depends on community. Every cell is community. And if we're going to change the situation we're in, we have to think in terms of community. But what we don't need is top-down solutions from billionaires and technologists and so forth, because nature is not top-down. You can't fix it, quote, quote, with top-down solutions. And yet that's what's being proffered, and that's what's being out there, and that's what's being written about, that's what's being funded. And to me, without sounding like snotty or something, it's just like I'm going, what are you thinking? What are you smoking? What are you drinking? Besides capital, besides money, maybe that's it, But using fear, because that's what the narrative is about, is, we're in big trouble, and if we don't do something, it's going to be worse. Okay, that's fear. It's being used all the time as a narrative. And it's not that there isn't some basis to it. There is. But using that as a way to motivate people to do something that's absolutely counter to common sense is what we're seeing.
So let's talk for a second about what the down is. This is something else I'm grateful to Paul for this book. A recent peer-reviewed study by Kears and colleagues estimate that plants direct the equivalent of 13.2 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually into mycorrhizal mycelia. This is a conservative estimate, not far from the combined annual carbon emissions of China and the United States, the world's two largest emitters. This is a key entryway for carbon, much of which is taken up by organisms in the soil. Fungal carbon capture is almost entirely ignored, while mechanical methods of direct air capture make for breathless headlines. The plant known as the atmospheric carbon scrubber does what biological systems have done for billions of years. If every U.S. household with an electric clothes dryer air dried their wash 6 or 7 times a year, it would reduce more greenhouse emissions than the Ector County plant and save households $3 billion in electricity bills. I've never used my dryer after I read that.
Well, yeah, that was a comparison to the Ector County direct air capture, which is being built right now. And it does cost $1 billion to build it, $300 million a year to run it, and it does 500,000 tons of CO2, which is just, it's 3 minutes. I don't know whether you got the 19. It's 3 minutes of our emissions on the planet. And so you have to give them credit for being ambitious, you know. We just need 20 million more of these. So yeah, I mean, again, how can I say it? I just feel on a deeper level in our children and young people and everywhere have been bathed in this narrative, you know, of fear for 50 years. The climate narrative has used fear and threat, existential threat, et cetera, Not that you would argue with that in terms of the ultimate implication of combusting fossil fuels at the rate we're doing it, but it's used that as a way, in a sense, to make sure that most people don't do anything about it because they can't. They just can't. They say, "Well, I hope you know what you're doing. I hope you do something." So I once went out, a man on the street, and with the microphone. It was fake, but I did interviews. I asked people, "Would you talk to me for a minute?" And said, "Yeah, what about climate?" I said, "Okay." Yeah. I said, "What does 1.5 C mean?" Several people about, I don't know, 80, 90 said, "Yeah, I've heard of that. What does it mean?" I said, "It's 1.5 C, Celsius or centigrade, whichever you prefer." And yeah, right, okay. I mean, they didn't know what it meant, which is the putative limit of warming that is going to not just, dislodge civilization as we know it. And I asked people, "Do you know what that means in Fahrenheit?" No one knew. No one knew. And I don't blame them, by the way. I don't think they're ignorant. I don't blame them. I'm not trying to belittle that. Not at all. I'm saying if the narrative is 1.5 C, what narrative is that? What does that tell you? And so we have created, the climate movement's created words, jargon, and so forth that ensures that a fraction of 1% of the people in the world today do anything about climate on a daily basis. Different countries, 30, 40% of people are aware of it. They're aware of it. And they're concerned. They are. I mean, I'm not. And about half of people on the planet don't know about it or aren't concerned because they don't know enough to be concerned and so forth. So if this is what we've done after 50 years, you would try to think, listen, you'd fire that ad agency. You know, that didn't really work. We're not selling anything at all. And so, again, carving the book of life is to say, can we just look at this from a different point of view? And when you get to the level of the descriptions there, some of them, when you start to understand how extraordinarily complex and beautiful and intricate the world is, the world we live on, the world we walk on, the food that we eat, what it comes from, our body itself, then you see, not only you see the world differently, but you see yourself differently. We're here for a short time, so what are we going to do? And to me, just speaking personally, my life has been about curiosity. It's been about possibility. It's about what needs to be born. What needs to come to fruition? What needs to be birthed? And what are the things we shouldn't do at all? Just like stop. And that's been true since I was a child. Because as a child, I could not understand where I lived. For sure. I'm not talking about mycelia right now. I'm talking about the culture. I remember my first not parents, but the first thing I saw on TV that appeared was the McCarthy hearings. And many of you probably may not know, but it was horrible television where Joseph McCarthy, the senator, was just humiliating artists and writers, for their putative link to the Communist Party, you know. And I go, okay, that's what started. And for me, and I'll say as a sort of biographical thing, it was so unsafe in my house. It was a terrible place to be as a child. And I wish it had been different, but it wasn't. And so I went outside, and there I felt safe. And that sort of is the DNA of my, you know, the way I saw the world and where I see the world to this day. And my uncle, Uncle Jack, was captured by the Japanese in World War II, and then escaped in the Philippines, and he lived in the jungle for 3 years, and he killed snakes to eat. And but he learned a lot about snakes. And he came back and became a herpetologist. And I remember going to his house, and there'd be just aquaria all over, full of different snakes. It was amazing, and we'd take them out, and he'd show me how to handle them and so forth. Even to the point of, it's like, this is how you handle a rattler. He had rattlers. And, you know, this is how you do it. You don't pick them up with the tail. You do this first, and then do that, and so forth. And so I learned, again, how to be with the living world in a way that wasn't a threat. You know, wasn't like, oh, my God, this is terrible, rattler. No, it's a beautiful being, just like every other being on Earth. And so that was sort of the programming, and, you know, incidental, coincidental, or accidental, I don't know, that, you know, in a sense, are the elements, the experiences that created this book. And when I did Project Drawdown, and that was like solutions, stop putting it up there, how to bring it back home. Okay, solutionism. I knew it then even, it was solutionism. And I knew when I did Drawdown that the next book would be Regeneration, because the only path forward, the only path through for us, for humanity, is regeneration, is to create more life. That there is no other way. I don't mean to be absolutist, but if you can think of another way, I'm all ears. But there isn't. If we're not going to create more life, then and do what we're continuing to do, which is to basically destroy it, then we're goners, and, you know, we'll be out of here. And as I said, the plants will be happy.
I'm actually gobsmacked, because we've known each other 50 years, and my first memory was the McCarthy period, and watching my Jewish communist relatives weeping in the living room, and I went outside. It's stunning. That was my first memory of television.
And when we're back there, we're back.
Yeah. Oh. So let me read what you say about wild here.
Okay.
Because this is not new to me because of reading Gary Snyder and knowing Gary, but wild is never crazy. Crazy is double glazing the planet with carboniferous era, killing the oceans with carbonic acid, sterilizing our soils, and then genetically manipulating seeds to fix our stupidity. The unraveling of our home planet is a mental disorder in which thoughts and feelings are so impaired they have no relationship to external reality. Wild is the opposite. It is when our thoughts, feelings, and actions are exquisitely sensitive to our relationship with the living world and each other. Wild is why we dance, write, sing, protest, play sports, climb mountains, stand on our heads, and become slam poets. It's the feeling of our feet as the earth, our eyes as the sky, our hearts like headwaters, our breath the atmosphere. We are denizens. Let's come home.
Yeah. I have this experience. Only once have I ever been asked to attend a writer's whatever meeting or get together. I guess nonfiction isn't considered being a writer. And but I shared something which I had never shared before, and that is that sometimes when I'm writing, I'll write, I'm a kind of writer, I write 2 paragraphs and go right back to the top, and then start to edit. and get to the bottom and go right back to the top again. It's like this. Some people do 1,000 words, go to bed, and wake up in the morning and look at what they wrote, and they edit that way, which is really interesting. Fiction writers tend to do that more. And but when I have had this experience of going back to the top of the 2 paragraphs I've just written, I read it and go, I never had these thoughts.
I never had what?
These thoughts. Never had them. I mean, just being honest to myself. There's no one else in the room. I mean, and so I think that's true for all of us in some way. You know, that process of just our consciousness is not just within our brain and brain cells and so forth. It is just as described, intimately connected to all other consciousness. And how we practice, how we become aware of that, how that influences our life is also a mystery. But I think writing to me is mysterious.
Because of all those, the dependent origination I spoke of earlier, being connected to everything, Buddhists say that everything is empty, because since nothing can stand alone, you can't find the orangeness in an orange. You can't find the core, something apple in an apple. You can't find the self. It's not like it's an organ. You can't find it. And what emptiness actually means is boundaryless. It actually means everything's connected. And I think that's the great importance of this book. And we don't have time enough. I mean, I just sat down today and did 20 pages. We could go on, but we ought to give people some time to ask questions.
I have a mic. Oh, it's a loud mic. And if you have questions, raise your hand. I'll try to get to as many people as possible. And if any of you online watching us have questions, you can submit them in the comment section, and we will try to get to those as well. A hand? Oh, okay. Do you want to say something too?
That's a bad habit at an auction.
Yeah, I'd like you to talk more about consciousness as each molecule has consciousness. Each species has its own species of consciousness. And it seems to me that when we think about the things we value in ourself, we value most what our consciousness is. And it seems to me that we have denied that to other living things that we are connected to on this planet. And if we acknowledge the value and the beauty of each individual consciousness and each different species of consciousness, the things that we value, the things we love, the things we protect. So, and I'm not the first one to say that. Can you talk more about that?
The last chapter is called Conscious, not Consciousness. And I read a lot about consciousness, and what I discovered is that there is no definition of consciousness, which I love. And so I left the ness off from the chapter title for that reason. And it's an exquisite subject. There's some beautiful books about it, and there's wonderful science, but it is the mystery of mysteries.
You should tell the story about how an envelope is written in Japan.
Oh yeah, I lived in Japan, and it's written backwards. And so if it was a letter to me, it would say 94941 Valley Mill, or that's like actually California Valley Mill, and then it would have Evelyn Avenue 35, right, and then it would say Hawken Paul. There was I'm the least important part of that address.
Can you talk a little bit about farming regeneration, soil restoration, all the benefits, and I'm sure a lot of people are well aware of it. So when you talked about generating, that's the first thing I thought of. There's, it seems like it's a non-funded movement, right? It's a lot of money to start to convert a dead farm to a organic farm with all these amazing benefits. But it seems like a real challenge for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, regeneration or regenerative agriculture is a buzzword, and so Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, Corteva, Cargill all use the word now, and they all have programs for you to become a regenerative farmer, by the way, and just sign up over here. And if you read the Syngenta description of regenerative agriculture on their website, please do. It's exquisitely well done. It really is well done. Like, I couldn't argue with anything except the bottom part. It says, with appropriate use of pesticides, herbicides, and other chemicals. So, I mean, they're using that. And I think these big companies, by the way, understand that there's no future in chemicals and soil. They understand it. They won't say it. They're not going to stop selling it. They know the future is biology. And so they're snapping up companies right and left who have microbial applications, different biological approaches to agriculture, that are singular in a sense, not a whole system, but, because that's where they're all going, and they're quite right, by the way. The thing about the Haber-Bosch process, NPK, synthetic chemicals, it was invented by Fritz Haber, a German, to make bombs more effective and cheaper. It was a war weapon. It came to create war. Our pesticides came from poison gases, also invented by the Germans. Okay, so, I mean, that's their origin, and they're like, wow, look what other uses it has. And but I think what the underlying understanding that's just starting to emerge, I think, is that true agriculture is feeding the soil, not the plant. The soil feeds the plant. If you want healthy plants, feed the soil. And when you feed the plant, it's obviously superficial. It's, from the top, you're top dressing. The plants like, oh, N, P, and K, thank you, I can grow big and green, and also vulnerable to insects, and not very strong, and not very nutritious, and so forth. That's the agriculture that we have created since for 100 and more years. And so I actually see something going on which is quite interesting in terms of the number of regenerative farmers in the world, and also resuscitating techniques and understanding biochar is one of them, of course, but that actually go back, decades or even hundreds of years, and particularly in Asia. And so I think there's an agricultural revolution going on right now, and it better happen fast, because what we're seeing in the last 16 months, what we saw was heating, which was unpredicted. Now, heating is being predicted. I mean, we're going to get hotter every year, of course, that's true. But the last 16 months that exceeded any kind of understanding climate scientists have about the mechanisms, and they still can't explain it, which means something changed. Maybe not. Maybe just anomaly. We'll see. But the fact is that heating causes what's called evaporative draw, which is it takes water out of the soil. Without water, there's no life. And so I feel like the big food companies, not so much the big farmers yet, maybe, but the big food companies, and I work with some of them as an advisor, saying, wake up, wake up. Your supply chain is at risk. You're not going to have the food that you sell. And take regeneration, put the word aside. Don't worry about it. The word you want to focus on is pragmatics and resilience. You want a resilient system. That is a regenerative system, of course, but the word is laden now with baggage in some ways, misuse. Resilience is not. And so the only way you can make a resilient agricultural system is to feed the soil. And we know how to do that, and we have new ways to do that. There's a company right here in Marin called Oath, and has the best biostimulants in the world. And the Paul Kagame of Rwanda just invested in a company in Marin. Why? Because they've been testing it in Rwanda, and it increases yields 30, 40, 50%. You know, and it's just microbes. You know, it changes the life of the soil. Now you can't use chemicals and kill the life at the same time. So, and the other thing that Oath has created is a biosensor, which is just like maybe that in diameter 6 feet, put it down in the soil, invented by an Indian woman at the University of Texas who is a doctor. And she used medical diagnostics as a way to place it in the soil, and so that it measures soil organic carbon, soil inorganic carbon, it measures nitrate, it measures moisture, bulk density, and microbial life, obviously I say water, and moisture. I mean, it measures 8 different elements in the soil, and in the soil, you can read on your phone in the morning. And it's real time. And no farmer ever in the history of humanity has had real-time feedback on soil. No, it's never happened. And farmers are good. They'll guess, they'll see, they'll look at color green, they'll look at the different fields. I mean, they're brilliant. They've been there walking their land, but they don't know for sure. And the difference now is that if you have that information, then if you do something, you can see what happened. And that sometimes took months for them to figure it out. It could take a whole harvest. It could be a whole cyclical thing. And now they can see instantly, do this, it makes it better. And so I'm working with the largest company in the world. You can guess who they are. And in the largest food company in the world as well. And saying, you need to educate farmers. And because every farmer in the world wants to be a better farmer. They do. They want to cut their costs. They don't want poisons around their children. You know, they might use them because they have to. They want to have it more productive, you know, less inputs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every farmer wants to be a better farmer. That's how you be a better farmer. So I think we're on the cusp of a change where the lingo, let's forget about the lingo, and let's go back to human values, you know, which is pride. Farmers have pride. You know, and do so in such a way that step by step by step, you are improving. Just like people try to improve their health. They get sick, they do something, all of a sudden they wake up and say, whoa, well, this is not working. I stopped drinking. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to, whatever. So this is where farmers are right now. And so regenerative agriculture, which goes back thousands and thousands of years, of course, is really going to come to the fore. And it's one of the things I feel really good about right now, because the food is inarguable. Without food, there is the rest of it. You know, you can kiss it goodbye. Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, I have a question I'd like to ask you.
Yeah.
So, you could say that to make a metaphor, that we're all prisoners of carbon. We're all hanging on the jungle gym of carbon. And yet, if you look at the political structure, if you look at the global warming, I have to say it's hard for me to avoid the conclusion that a lot of the people in the C-suites, a lot of the people in the upper elites, a lot of people in 60 and over have made a calculation that if they do nothing, they'll probably die with their power and their wealth intact, and someone else will have to deal the problem. Because I don't see, except in situations like this, I don't see meaningful discussion of, if we want to get rid of cattle, we can't ask the farmers to bear the price by themselves. It's a national or a global issue. How are we going to help make them whole? If we're going to keep petroleum in the ground, how are we going to protect the investors from going bankrupt? If we need to drive less, what are we going to do? Are we going to have odd license plates, drive Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? no significant dialogue at all over corporate media. For everyday people, what can you do? And I think that the awareness of global warming is like the lid on the pressure cooker, which is producing anger, anxiety, the feeling that we're running out of time and we better get ours now. And it's exacerbating the whole dilemma. And I know you must have thought of that, and you know more about it than I do, and I'd like to hear you say something about it.
Well, I wouldn't say we're a prisoner of carbon. We are blessed by carbon. So that's carbon's the flow of life.
I stand corrected.
Yes, you do. Okay. I'm happy to do so. Carbon's our ally. This is end times, everybody, for sure. This is not like, oh, we're going to just pivot and make a right turn and do this, and people are going to wake up, and then, you know, capitalism is going to disappear in front of our eyes. And it's not. And the momentum of capital is just heartbreaking and awful and fascistic and on. Lots of adjectives for that one. But I think it's really important to understand that, you know, this is apocalyptic times, and there's people who can see it earlier. They just sense it. It's obvious, I think, to those who see it until you do. If you don't see it, it's not obvious. And to me, what's so beautiful about the word, though, apocalypse, is it's a Greek word. It means revealing what is hidden. That's what it means. And so we're in that process. What's been hidden and secreted, you know, and, you know, oblique to us and so forth, is being revealed. And it's pretty terrifying. It's pretty scary. It's venal like hell, you know. It's, you know, in terms of ownership and capital and exploitation. I mean, this has been going on 500 years now from, you know, colonists and settlers. So this is not new, but the rate at which it's accelerating is extraordinary. And I just think, okay, got it. That's where we live. That's the times we're in. Accept it and so forth. Now, what are you going to do? But what you're not going to do is go into despair and think, oh man, we're screwed. We are fucked, okay? So let's just say it, okay? And then, now what are you going to do? I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, we talked about recent arrivals. I'm leaving soon, you know, as most older people are. And not everyone, I guess, but I am. And so what are you going to do in their last X years? You know, how can you connect to provide meaning to self and other? I mean, if it's not for other, then it's just a self, and that's sort of narcissistic. I mean, what is it that we can do? And each person has a way to find that. Maybe your friend knows. Maybe you see something that's going on that you can help with, you know. Help a child, for goodness sakes, you know. I mean, regeneration isn't just about soil. It's about the whole tamale, really, about improving people's lives, their nutrition, their health, their well-being, their access, education, you know, and it is so beautiful where we are right now, in a wonderful way, because it's so clarifying. It hasn't been so clear. You know, I don't know, we all grew up in a kind of confusion, like, what's going on? I'll speak for myself. You know, like I said, as I grew up, I said, I didn't understand the world I had been born into. It didn't make sense. Now I know it doesn't make sense. I was right. It wasn't me, you know? And so, to me, that's so clarifying. So clarifying. And so, you know, I mean, I may wake up tired because I stayed up or do this or that and so forth, but I know what I'm going to do in the morning for that day and the next day and all the days of my life. You know, and that's something that is a blessing. It's there. It's just like, it's like an offering, you know, if you will. Take it. It's yours. And so that's how I see it, as opposed to, you know, I see the dilemma, I see the tragedy of it, I see the suffering, and I feel the grief. And sometimes, because as a writer, I need to read the Times, the Financial Times, the Guardian. You know, I don't watch Fox News, but I mean, I read the press, and every morning, and that's all about amygdala. It's all about amygdala. It's about scare the shit out of you. It's the click-through thing. And it's not that it's not true. It's just that that's a hard way to wake up. But for me, I read it because I have to know the zeitgeist. Who am I writing to? What world am I writing into, you know? Especially when the book is 2 years out before it actually gets published. And for me, I feel that despair. I go to bed with it sometimes. It's really can be depressing. I mean, I'm not immune to that. I'm happy to see you tonight. It makes me really happy, especially, you know, because when you're writing, it's very lonely. So, like, thank you for coming tonight. But the thing about that is that that grief comes from what? Where does grief come from? It comes from love. It can't come from anything else. Why would you grieve something if you didn't care about it?
It's the price tag for loving.
No, it's not a price tag. It's the gift. It's the gift. It's the entry point into love. Because love comes from our heart. And it's the only place it can come from. And our heart's the organ that always tells the truth. And we live in a world of lies. So our grief is our guide, you know, is our mentor, is our angel, you know, that is with us all the time. We open our eyes and read, which I know you do. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
I'm going to just take one last question because he's been patiently waiting.
And it's really short.
Well, we can hear you, and we can repeat the question.
There you go.
Hi, Paul. I had a longish and interesting question, but Peter basically asked it, and you've thoroughly answered it. So I'm just going to say thank you.
So on that note, thank you so much, both of you, for this incredibly wonderful conversation. Thank you all for coming and being part of it. We're going to do a quick change here, put a table up so Paul can sign books for you. So if I could ask people to line up from about here going down, and we'll reset the table. And the books are available at the register if you haven't purchased it yet. Go ahead.